ZN Life is brought to you by ZN, the OG digital agency in Brussels.
And live from Brussels and Athens, the birthplace of democracy, it's ZN Live. I'm very excited today. I'm Phil Weiss, the founder and CEO of ZN, and this is episode 378. With me as my co-host is Evie, our fantastic account manager who's looking after a range of different clients and is doing some fantastic work in communication and social media. And our guest today, who is also Greek, because both Evie and Nectaria are Greek, live from Athens, is Nectaria. Nectaria is a very experienced professional communicator working across a whole range of different topics in different sectors. And she's actually been focused specifically on topics around women's empowerment and looking at the origin of unconscious biases. And you are the leader of the Lean In Circle, Women in Business in Greece. So thank you for joining us, and tell us a little bit more about why you got involved with this initiative and what it is about.
Thank you so much for inviting me today. I'm really excited to talk to you about my passion for women and girls empowerment. Regarding your question about Lean In was created to help women achieve their ambitions and to help companies build inclusive workplaces where women of all identities are supported and empowered. I'm a leader of a Lean In Circle in Greece called Women in Business. I co-launched it with two other women leaders because more than 3 years ago, when I relocated from Brussels to Athens, I realized that there weren't many English-speaking women networks in Athens that I could join. And I was looking for that support and empowerment when I had returned back to Greece. So I was exposed to the Lean In network in Greece and was encouraged to co-launch my own circle for women in business. Lean In circles are small groups that come together regularly for peer-to-peer mentorship, to give and get support, and basically to help women reach their potential and their aspirations, whether personal or professional. A bit of context about Lean In circles and some background that I think you'll find interesting. Today, there are more than 80,000 Lean In circles in more than 180 countries, and this is telling. It's telling because it shows that there is a strong need for women to come together, to support one another, to share their challenges, and to find solutions together. And after 10 years of these Lean In circles operating around the world, last year, Lean In Girls was launched, recognizing that there is a need to actually start earlier. So Lean In Girls, and I'm excited to talk to you about it today a little bit as well, focuses on girls ages 12 to 18 to really help them understand their own important leadership traits, what they can bring to the table so that when they do get older, they're able to, again, pursue their aspirations and whether personal or professional. One thing that is important here is to call out that Lean In Girls is especially important because if women are having challenges today, navigating unconscious biases, gender stereotypes in the workplace and societies, imagine how much more challenging it is for young girls. And so this is what I've been involved in. Really excited to share more about it in our conversation, and excited to also share more about some of the unconscious biases that we see at play.
Thank you very much, Nectaria. I think it's a very interesting and, it's like at the same time important topic. And it's sad that we have to, still kind of like address it and basically create, circles in which we kind of like have to deal with the issue. But at the same time, it's very, very, reflected positively that, there is a change in society. So from your experience, in what ways do stereotypes about gender roles influence the career paths and opportunities available to women and girls? Now, especially, that you're in touch, with younger women and younger girls.
So Unconscious biases really are impacting women. They're impacting their ability to advance their careers. And there are many different ways that we can see unconscious biases take place. So it's important to clarify that when we talk about unconscious biases, there are many different. Today we're talking about gender bias, but other biases may lead people to believe that, for example, older people have less to offer in the workplace, or believe the same thing about younger people. There are biases that refer to accent biases, how people whose English, whose native language is in English or is another language may be treated differently. When it comes to women in the workplace and unconscious biases, one of the strongest unconscious biases that women face is maternal bias. It's also referred to as the maternal wall, where women are viewed as perhaps not being as committed or even as competent if they have children. And this is something that does come up frequently in the workplace, even in informal conversations. Messages may be communicated along the lines of, she's a young mother with 2 young children. Is she up for this promotion? Can she take it? Or a high profile, challenging project may come up and a mother may not be given that opportunity. A man might receive it because she may be, viewed as not being able to handle it because it requires more hours or it's more intense. And while there may not be bad intentions with these kinds of communications or thoughts because they're unconscious biases, they do have the ability over time to impact a woman's career advancement.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting point. And you talked about broader biases. And I recommend last week the Culture Map, which is a great book about different ways we approach conversations and communication from different cultures. And I just actually have a question around this, because you talk about gender bias. You obviously worked in an international environment. How different do you see those biases from one country to another? And how do you deal with this in a kind of multicultural context?
Mm-hmm. That's actually really interesting. I would say that there are many environments where a lot of progress has been made, and we talked about this earlier, where it's very optimistic, and we are seeing a much stronger awareness of these biases and more actions that are taken to close the gender gap and to support women and girls. I would say that in some environments where that doesn't exist, it is a bit more challenging to even make that progress because there is more pushback as well. So I would say that it's really important to be able to understand local sensitivities, understand cultural norms, various stereotypes that exist about women and girls, and to be able to understand first before diving in to trying to make change. And that's really important. It's important that first we seek to understand why these behaviors are happening. We seek to understand how these stereotypes have come about, and then to decide what is the most appropriate action, because it's important to have that awareness and that sensitivity.
I think, in the US, the diversity and inclusion conversation has faced a bit of a backlash in recent times. I think, every company was kind of embracing it, and now you hear some leaders, it tends to be quite political, but basically pushing back on this. So my first question is, how much progress do you think these initiatives have made? And are you concerned about a kind of backlash about some of these, or do you think that the general trajectory is clearly going in the right direction?
So I think that, again, it depends on the environment that you're in, but I think it's also important that those who are supporting women and girls empowerment do remain proactive and do keep pushing forward, because it is important that we realize that we all have a role to play. This isn't something that someone else needs to be doing somewhere far off and that we need to be just listening to and monitoring. We really need to realize that if we want to see change in our workplaces and in our societies, we need to realize that we all have a role to play. And part of that is raising awareness on the advantages and how creating a more equal society and workplace can really benefit everyone. Everyone can benefit from gender equality. And it's really important to understand that economies, businesses, and communities can all benefit from gender equality. So it's important to call out these important arguments. There's a strong economic argument to be made for closing the gap on gender equality. According to the McKinsey Global Institute, advancing women's employment could add 12 trillion to global GDP. That's incredible. Companies that are gender and ethnically diverse outperform their peers. Diverse teams equal better decisions. Safe and inclusive workplaces equal more creativity and innovation. So there's a very strong case to be made for taking actions to promote gender equality, whether in the workplace or in society. These efforts should only be accelerated, considering that we need around 130 years before we can close the gender gap.
That's very, very, very interesting. And thank you for also sharing these insights with us, Nectaria. I think it would be very interesting as well for us to know how do our societal perception of leadership qualities differ based on gender as well? And how does this impact the representation of women in leadership roles and positions at this point?
I think that's a great question, Evie. And I'm actually going to ask you and Phil a question and ask you, if I were to ask what leadership traits, come to mind when you think of a good leader, what immediately comes to mind? What's the first word that comes to mind?
For me, it's actually, proactivity and resilience actually would be the two things that I really want to see in a leader.
Yes,
you,
I think I would add empathy as well to that, Phil. I think, it's like you really need to be, it's like counting on the team and the people that, it's like bring, it's like an association or organization where it is, and, it's like be there, it's like to kind of like listen, receive feedback, and not just, it's like be a leader, but more of a mentor. And that's what I also admire so much about our environment at ZN specifically, because we have so many, it's like women leaders in many different roles, but they don't, it's like there is no competition. It's more about, it's like inspiration and mentorship, so that you grow in a role and basically, it's like you feel better and continue building your career without, it's like having to enter any mishaps in a sense.
Yeah, and that's encouraging to hear those words, because we still face the traditional perceptions of what good leaders look like. And that's something else that we need to overcome. We need to expand our view of what it looks like to lead. We need to really, blow up the traditional command and control definitions of leadership. And we need to be looking at other characteristics that bring value to organizations and to better decision making. Traditionally, the more vocal and outgoing people are characterized as more effective leaders than those who are more collaborative, observant, reserved, and reflective. And it's important that we pause and we take a step back and we understand the value that these type of leadership traits bring into organizations. And at times, I think, Evie, you asked the question of how these leadership definitions may impact women's advancement. It does, because women, have been shown to have these traits more frequently, and they have been shown to also allocate more time developing their teams, mentoring, managing people to help them advance. And so a lot of times these very valuable leadership qualities may be overlooked because there is a stronger focus being placed on how vocal or outgoing or quick and decisive a leader might be. And at times this can really impact career advancement.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, in my personal experience with, as Evie described, we have a very strong leadership with women in key positions. And I think that's why, for me, proactivity is actually about just thinking ahead and saying, what is it that we need to anticipate and just put in place the different steps to do things. And it's kind of a strategic idea. But I think the question maybe is, in a small organization, what is your advice for people like us to basically pay attention to in order, because you have a lot of control in your own company or in a small organizations. So what would you tell people running, or who are in the leadership roles, what should they do to make sure that they're helping this?
I think that's a great question, Phil, because these changes can't happen overnight. And it's important to realize that small changes every day can make a really big difference. So I would say that one, it's important to invest in raising awareness on unconscious biases in the workplace. There are many different types of trainings and activities that can, take place in a small organization. We've talked about the one that Lean In has launched for small and large organizations called 50 Ways to Fight Bias, which is excellent and very easy to use. But it's not something that can be addressed with one training and then everyone goes back to their work days. It really is something that needs to be part of the culture. These values of trying to be aware and alert of unconscious biases, what kinds of words are used when we refer to women, what kinds of words are used when we refer to men, how do we characterize male and female behaviors, and do we see them in a positive or in a negative light? There's a lot to be said about how assertive women are in the workplace, and the tight balancing act that they need to do to demonstrate that they are assertive. But if they are too assertive, then that may be seen negatively. And so because of the likability bias, as women being perceived as needed to be not, creating challenges. And this at times can create challenges for women. But if it's addressed head on, and if these types of biases are discussed openly with the organization, with the employees, I really think that progress can be made. It's really about being proactive, taking the time to invest in raising awareness, challenging negative stereotypes or cultural norms, asking questions. And I would even say that how it's very important to be able to ensure that people managers are also rewarded and given the tools that they need to be able to drive this change across the organization.
Right now, what do you do? And because I'm sure you've experienced this, and we certainly have. You're in a meeting with, it could be a client or somebody else, and if somebody says something that you think, oh my God, we've just went back to 30 years in this conversation. There's sometimes, I think this happens when people just go like, nobody says anything, and then you move on. And then the question is, do you call it out? Do you, what's your suggestion? And especially for people maybe who are a little bit more junior, how can they play a role without, just getting fired or getting into a very difficult situation when somebody says something which, might just not be intentional, but is clearly out of line?
I think that's a really good example you raised, Phil, because you're right. It should be addressed and not just ignored and discussed afterwards by, a smaller group of employees somewhere where it's, kind of thrown under the rug. Absolutely. I think that it also depends on the situation. So, you mentioned a meeting environment. I think that a lot of times in meetings, we see different things happening. Women, actually studies show that women get more interrupted than men in meetings. And so I think that that's really interesting. Something that someone can do right there on the spot. If a woman, for example, gets interrupted more frequently in a meeting and she's not able to share her point of view, someone can actually call out and say, you know what, why don't we circle back to so-and-so? She had something to say. I'd really like to hear from her. Or, why don't we hear everyone's views and go around the table and see what everyone has to say, to try and build a more inclusive environment by intervening with specific questions, probing questions. Someone can even ask if someone says something that triggers these reactions. Per your example, you can just ask the simple question of why, what made you say that? What is it that has led you to say
what
that? Please explain, elaborate.
Yeah,
But also there are other channels. So it is important to know that employees have a safe space to go and share to their HR department or to their supervisors, to be able to raise it even on, on a one-on-one basis, to be able to recognize that something made them feel uncomfortable, something that was said was inappropriate. It's very important that the leaders in an organization walk the talk when it comes to being open and making employees feel comfortable to share their concerns and that there won't be retaliation. That's very important. And so people leaders have a lot of responsibility in an organization to demonstrate the behavior so that then others can follow.
Great. Okay, we have time for a couple of quick recommendations.
Recommendation.
Yeah, we have a recommendation jingle. So Nectaria, tell us, what are your recommendations for our viewers this week?
So recommendations in terms of what to do, or
Books,
did we talk
no,
about?
books,
Oh, yes,
books.
absolutely. Yes. So recommendations. So definitely recommend the 50 Ways to Fight Bias. It's on the Lean In website. It's an excellent tool for small and large organizations with real life examples of what women face in the workplace, microaggressions, different types of biases. Lean In Girls curriculum. Anyone who's interested in empowering girls ages 12 to 18 should definitely check out this curriculum. And there's also a great article in there about how adults can empower girls.
Fantastic. Evie, what is your recommendation for our viewers?
My recommendation, Phil, is the Haberman Lab podcast. You can find it, I think, on both Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and it's a podcast that discusses neuroscience, but how our brain and its connections with the organs and our body control our perceptions. How can it, help us grow our mindset, our change and alter our behaviors, and basically benefit our health. And I think it's very interesting. It's fact-based and science-based, it's a topic very, very close to my past master degree in gastrophysics, and mind perception. So I think it's cool if you could give it a try and listen to it.
Thank you so much. And my recommendation actually is the movie Her, with the voice of Scarlett Johansson, which has been in the news last week because of the new release of ChatGPT from OpenAI, which is using a very similar voice. She didn't agree for her voice to be used, so it's in the news. They might have to pull it. So anyway, if you're interested in the latest version of ChatGPT 4.0, that's the one you have to check out. So that's all we have time for today. Thank you so much for being with us, Nectaria, and we will see you online. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.
Bye.